All right, this will be the most comprehensive yet concise guide on the internet as to exactly what you need to focus on to dominate that first year as an SDR in B2B or tech sales. My name is Connor Murray. I've been in enterprise software sales for 7 years now at a Fortune 50 company. I began as an SDR in that entry-level role, struggled out of the gate following a lot of what is commonly taught out there, implemented these techniques, and quickly became the #1 SDR in my cohort. Since then, I've promoted all the way up to the enterprise account executive role and spent 2 years in the middle as an SDR manager, coaching hundreds of reps both at my company and outside my company, these exact techniques. And I know exactly what new SDRs need to focus on in order to ramp up and roll as quickly as possible. So today I'm going to be covering what you need to actually be focused on in those first 30 days. Even if you're more tenured than that, I think this is going to be useful for you. I'm going to be covering my process that I call coiling the spring, which is essentially laying the foundation for you to succeed and actually reduce a lot of friction for yourself. We're going to be covering effective sales messaging, so both cold calls and emails and how to structure them. Then we're going to be talking, arguably most importantly, about efficient daily processes. This is how you go from succeeding or doing well in the SDR role, but it being a grind, to it starting to feel like a game. Then we're going to talk about once the meetings are trickling in, how to convert those both from a show rate standpoint, increasing your meeting show rate, and also meeting to opportunity rate. And then finally, how you can continuously optimize this process throughout your time as an SDR and prepare yourself for that account executive role. So let's get into it. All right, so those first 30 days, and by 30 days, I mean you're out of training, you're fully ramped in seat, the clock is ticking, you have a quota, and it's go time. I think a lot of people get overwhelmed. They're looking for advice in all different directions. Everyone's got different advice and different opinions on how you should go about it. In my opinion, get a simple process in place that you can follow daily, which hopefully this video will help with. And it's not about getting it perfect out of the gate. It's just about getting started. So don't overthink, because there's absolutely a 0% chance that the processes you start with are going to be your processes in 3 months or 6 months or 9 months. You're going to get better at them over time, just like anything else in life. But the key is to just get started and start getting data points and start going through the motions, because everything is going to feel hard in the beginning. Some of you may be experiencing this. I remember I'd only ever used Gmail in my life throughout college. In my first day in seat, I had Outlook, and even using things like Outlook and maneuvering the inbox was difficult. Everything is a mental strain. Just be prepared for that. It's going to go away, but you have to get used to the new email system or your new CRM or how things are done internally. A lot of that is just going to become second nature, but you have to push through this period and start putting processes in place. What processes should you be putting in place? You should immediately be trying to emulate the top performing reps and their processes. So be looking in your Salesforce, your SalesLoft, your outreach. Look at the one or existing opportunities that have been piped. What was in there? How did they get piped? What are the campaigns, the subject lines, the emails that are working best? You should also be, hopefully this channel can serve, but looking at people on YouTube that have done well, or LinkedIn. However, a big point of caution, do not get too distracted. This is such a common mistake I see, is that people want to take advice from all different areas. They follow 20 people on LinkedIn, 5 on YouTube, people at their own company. And if you're trying too many things, you're trying nothing at all. You need to pick 2 to 3 people max, even one that you resonate with. And you're like, okay, what this person is makes sense. I think I can actually implement what they're saying. Because when you get too distracted and spread too thin, it's just counterproductive, because you're not getting enough data points if you're trying someone's technique one day, another technique the next day. And people make the mistake of seeing one post on LinkedIn that they like from a person, immediately following them and taking everything they say as gospel from there, even though the rest of their posts are not that valuable. I see it all the time on LinkedIn. People post one cool post that gets a lot of traction, they get a lot of followers, but the rest of what they have to say is not that helpful. So 2 to 3 max. The other thing you need to be doing in these first 30 days, you got to get this right out of the gate. It's so important. I try and make videos on this topic, and people don't always want to listen, but I encourage you, please listen to this, especially if you're a new SDR. You got to nail your account executive or account executive plural relationships. It's sad to say, it's probably not ideal, but I've seen it play out. These partnerships can end up being over 50% of your success. And I'm not just talking about freebies here. I was from a unique position where I spent 2 years as an SDR manager. And for that tenure, we supported just about the same team of field reps. Most of the individuals remain the same. So I saw two different classes go through the same set of field reps. And there were people in that first cohort who were like, oh, I can't get any ops. My field rep's too difficult to work with. And I mistakenly kind of took them at their word, but was kind of surprised when the second cohort came in and that supposed bad field rep that was too difficult and didn't give them any ops all of a sudden became like the best field rep. And I realized, okay, there's a lot more to this than just accepting whether a field rep's good or bad. A lot of that's actually within your control. So going in these first meetings with them, it's a double-edged sword. I say that because you do want to impress them. You want to get on their good side, but at the same time, you work with them, not for them. A lot of reps come in with this mentality that because their AEs are more senior, that they work for them and that they're above them, they're higher on the totem pole. That's not true. You're in two different organizations that have different priorities that are both important to the business. That's why both organizations exist. AEs focus on the short term, on closed revenue, business development, more longer term pipeline generation, health of the business. So don't fall into the trap of becoming what I call an assistant to your account executive. I see it a lot where you start doing work or activities on behalf of them that are realistically either their job or not serving you. I see this a lot where they're like, hey, just blast 1,000 webinar invites out that never lead to opportunities, or hey, can you fill out this list for me and segment my territory, and they just give you busy work to do. So it's a double-edged sword because you want to build that relationship, give more in that first month, but don't let them walk all over you. And the other thing you need to do is convince them very quickly that you're going to be a value add. Almost no SDR is going to be a value add on day one, but you need to give them the confidence that you're going to be worth investing in. And that if they spend time and invest in you and help you get ramped up, that it's going to pay dividends for them down the line. So don't go in looking for freebies at first. They should come naturally. The better and better, the harder you work for them, the better results you perform. You're getting better and better over time. I've seen it time and time again, whether you want to call them freebies or jump balls where a meeting could have been an op, it could go either way. When they really like you and want you to keep doing work for them, that's when the opportunities start to become easier to get from them. So here's some actual things to do when you're first running those initial AE meetings. You have to get a weekly cadence on the calendar. A lot of reps won't immediately agree to this. That's a red flag. You need to have that on their calendar. Those meetings are worth their weight in gold. They're arguably more valuable than actual customer meetings because this is where they can point you in the right directions. You're on their mind. You're meeting with them every week. They're always thinking about you. Things come up where they're like, hey, go after that account. Actually, I know there's something going on there. If you book a meeting, we'll get an opportunity for sure. The other thing you have to do is clearly articulate your KPIs to them. Make sure they understand how you get paid. I see this a lot, especially if your account executive didn't grow within the company. Maybe they were a professional hire. They often don't know how the SDRs or the BDRs actually get paid. They just think they're almost consultants that they give busy work to, and they don't understand whether it's I need to set X number of meetings, I need to get X number of opportunities, or I need to get X dollars of pipeline. Don't just tell them once, assume they're going to forget. Tell them over and over again. Let them know how you're tracking, how you're doing towards quota. Again, it's subconscious, but this is how you get this stuff on their mind, and it increases the likelihood they give you opportunities after meetings and they proactively reach out to you instead of you having to reach out to them. Another key, come to each meeting with a plan. This is such a key mistake reps make. Don't just come with a blank stare and ask them what to do. I've experienced this myself with as an account executive where I'm super busy week. I'm like, oh my God, I barely have time for this meeting. And I jump on and they're like, so what accounts should I target? And I'm like, you have to come up with a plan, have an idea, even if it's just a very basic plan and say, hey, I was going to go after these accounts, these personas within those accounts. What do you think? And just that small effort of showing them that you actually put in a little thought is going to go a long way and make it a lot more likely they continue to work with you and invest in you. And then they'll point you in the right directions if your plan is not the right one, in their opinion. And then lastly, this goes for your first initial meetings. Do not get boxed out of your accounts. So a lot of reps have really big territories, and I've seen it where they go in and they ask the question, which accounts should I go after? Which accounts should I target? You need to flip that. This alone is going to get you all the value you're looking for out of this video. Instead, ask, which accounts should I stay away from? Because what I've seen is, call it a territory of 300 accounts. They lead off with this, which ones should I target? And then they get 10 accounts handed to them. And then it becomes this give and take relationship where they have to constantly go to their AE and say, which accounts, and they get 5 or 10 to work with at a time, where you more want to say, which one should I stay away from? Because it's fair if they're like, I have a deal cycle or I'm late stage with a certain company, they'd be confused if a new person reached out, it wouldn't make sense. Cool, sure. You don't want to reach out to those accounts. You want to play nice with them. But these accounts are yours just as much as they are theirs. And your job is, you have a quota, you have a career you want to promote. Like, you need to have access to your full territory if you want to hit your number. So these are some really important initial things to get right. This is going to make the rest of your year a lot easier, and it can simultaneously make it a lot harder if you don't get it right out of the gate. It's hard to mend. So next we'll go into coiling the spring. You got the relationship. Now what you want to be doing is creating lists. So these lists are going to be used for cold calling and cold emailing. And you want to do them by persona, by industry, and or by market segment. And another one you can do it is by account if your accounts are big enough, like if you go after really big accounts with a lot of employees. But what you want to do before you just start randomly picking up the phone or randomly making emails, picking a person here or there, adding a bunch of contacts to account, and you have an IT director, then an HR analyst, then a VP of finance, and your talk track needs to be different for each one. Start with the highest value personas that your company goes after and the highest value industries, if there are specific industries you play best in. And then using either SalesNav or Apollo.io or whatever internal CRM system you have, filter leads and create lists that have what I call homogeneous priorities, challenges, or pain points. Chances are, if you make a list of VPs of finance or VPs of HR, you can make one script or one template that addresses the priorities, challenges, and pain points of all of them. And it's going to be relevant regardless of what account they work at. So we're then going to create scripts and templates that are tailored to each of those lists so that you can move fast and reduce friction. I'll talk more about this in a bit. But the purpose of this exercise, like I just said, is to reduce daily friction, because this is normally stuff that slows reps down that they have to do on a day-by-day basis. When you do this right up front, and it can take days or even a week, depending on how long you're trying to set yourself up for, you can do it for the month, for the quarter, or even for the year if you do it right. You will physically have something to do right away each morning when you sit down. You don't have to sit down and like, what list am I going to target today? What contacts am I going to pull? What am I going to say to them when I call them or when I email them? I got to type up an email. You want to do all that up front so that when you sit down, you can physically, okay, I'm going to go after this list. Here's the associated email template, boom, boom, boom. And before you still have brain fog, but you're still being productive right away because you coiled the spring and set this up for yourself. Otherwise, like I said, this is something you're going to have to do on a daily basis. And the way to really get good in the SDR role is eliminate all this daily friction and these daily activities you need to do and take the time to do them up front. Even if it takes a weekend to do it, it's so worth it because it slows you down, it breaks your flow, and it decreases productivity. And again, if you do this right, you can set yourself up for a month, a quarter, or even a year. I typically set myself up for a quarter. Hopefully I've done well that quarter and I can use the last week of that quarter to then coil the spring for the next quarter. That's how I like to do it. So here's an example. If you sell financial management software, likely these are going to be some of your top personas that you tend to go after. The C-suite, that's always going to be the case for most roles. The CFO, the COO, the CIO, but then you have titles like the VP of Financial Planning and Analysis, controllers, treasurers, financial analysts, VPs and directors of finance. All of them have similar priorities and generally have similar things they're responsible for, but they are a little bit different. So you can tailor scripts that are slightly targeted to controllers versus treasurers or financial analysts because the things they care about, the priorities they're responsible for, their pain points and challenges are all slightly different. And this is going to increase the likelihood on cold emails or cold calls that your message resonates. And then you can separate it by industry as well. So maybe some of your top industries are financial services or healthcare, or consumer packaged goods. So you can do controllers that work in financial services, financial analysts that work in financial services, financial analysts that work in healthcare. You can even go to the sub industry, because a lot of times the priorities get even more specific depending on the sub industry. So for FinServ, insurance, banking, wealth management, healthcare, med device, biotech, hospitals, you can slightly tweak the messaging. But when you're first starting out, just start with the main personas. You don't have to get too deep in the weeds. This is going to be a process throughout those initial months. And it's honestly a never-ending process. The more time you have and the more you do this, you'll continue tweaking them, and you can get down to the sub-industry level. And then you can, even if it's relevant, get to the market segment. Maybe you have different products or services or play better in different spaces when it comes to revenue bands. Maybe you do really well with 5 million to 25 million revenue where they're growing fast, or maybe you do well with a billion plus, or maybe employee count is the more relevant metric. And there's more than these, but you want to identify those trigger points, create lists with high quality characteristics, ICPs that you go after, and then make targeted templates that are slightly tweaked for all of them. And this is easy because it's a similar repeatable structure that I'm going to show you in a second. So now we're getting into that, and I'm going to start with email. So the way you do this, and you now you have your lists ready. Now we're going to design some templates that are targeted for each of these lists. The key is you want to design messaging that's going to help you be targeted at scale. And my motto is always simple, easy, repeatable. So you can set aside your A or your more strategic accounts that maybe you and your account executive have talked about that you really want to slow down and be a little more targeted with. This is for those other sea of accounts. I've seen a lot of your territories. Oftentimes it's hundreds or thousands of accounts with tens of thousands of people you could go after that you wouldn't have time. You wouldn't have any time to reach out to them individually unless you come up with some sort of messaging that's targeted at scale. So email is more scalable. Cold calling, I consider each individual cold call a higher quality interaction. And the data shows it. There's higher show rates. The meetings convert to opportunities more off cold calls, but both are very effective. So for email structure, the way I like to keep it simple is 3 body paragraphs, 5 to 6 sentences. So a lot of what I'm going to say here maybe contradicts what you've seen on LinkedIn. I have seen this to be a proven, repeatable framework that has worked at many different companies, regardless of what you sell and what segment you sell into. And what you must clearly and concisely communicate, you've probably heard me say this if you're a follower of the channel, in those 5 to 6 sentences are who you are, why you're reaching out to them, which is typically in the first sentence, what priorities and challenges you solve, and then in the second sentence, how you solve them, and then state what you want, time on their calendar, give them a couple options. The key undertone to have in your messaging, and this differs a lot from the LinkedIn gurus and what's taught out there, is that it might sound old school, an assumptive undertone still works best. There's a balance. You don't want to overdo it. I'll show you how not to, but your email should imply, like expect that a meeting is going to be taking place, not asking, hey, do you have time? Is this worth a chat? Are you open to it? The response rates to those are so low. The key to this too is the follow-ups are also assumptive. When you combine those two together, an assumptive tone over email gets a lot more responses, and responses lead to meetings. The more responses you get, whether good or bad, are more shots on net to book meetings. So here's an example. It's a lot of words, so maybe pause and read it. But at first glance, you can see how these almost look the exact same. So I wrote a template for, again, the financial management. 1, a VP of FP&A, financial planning and analysis. 2, a controller. If you weren't reading the words, the structure looks, they almost look the exact same. It's 3 bodies, and I put in bold or highlighted what I changed based on the title I know I'm reaching out to. So I'll read the first one. My name is Connor Murray, and I'm part of the, whatever your company name, XYZ company, financial applications team responsible for supporting ABC company. Given your role, I'm looking to introduce our team and get aligned with your priorities going forward. So making this about them. Nice, concise, simple. This is not something you need to change depending on the account or the title you're reaching out to, except little things like if you're reaching out to HR people, maybe say HRIS applications, just little tweaks like that. My team works with organizations on priorities related to strategic planning, budget forecasting, and financial analysis. We work with customers on automating account reconciliations in much of the close process, predictive planning capabilities, and scenario modeling through the use of AI and machine learning. I'm looking to set some time for an introduction, as my team will be your point of contact for any priorities in these areas going forward. Do either of the following dates work? Couple easy options for them to pull up. Thanks in advance. Statistically the best signature line and assumptive. Connor. So let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments, but read this closely. You could send this to a VP of FP&A in just about any company or any industry, and it's going to be a pretty relevant template for them. Again, we're designing this to be targeted at scale, but you have to put in the upfront effort. Where I got these bolded lines, typically you're going to get that off your website. So you don't just copy and paste the marketing language on their website. But one thing companies are really good at pretty unanimously is their websites. And they very carefully pick the language as to what your value proposition is and how you help give value and solve pain points and challenges for customers. And you can pick it by persona, by industry. All of that should be on your website. There's probably lots of internal stuff you have too, where you can easily plug and play stuff that's relevant depending on the persona. So now look at the controller one. I won't read it all again, but I just slightly tweaked some of the priorities and challenges we focus on and how we solve them that are more relevant to a controller versus a VP of FP&A. You don't need to understand finance or sell into finance people. Like, a lot of this probably looks the same. Just know that I slightly made this more targeted for FP&A, like planning, where controllers are more focused on the actual transactional accounting. So I focused on more on the close, cash flow management. I focused on the automating and transaction matching. These are things that are more targeted for a controller. But this is a nice, concise script. They're going to scan it, because most of these, sometimes they're reading it on their phone or they're just briefly scanning it. Sometimes you have 10 seconds and they're just going to see, a lot of this sounds relevant to me. This person sounds concise, like they might be worth spending more time with. They're competent, and it's going to increase the likelihood that they respond. Again, most people don't respond to your initial email. They respond to a follow-up that encourages them to go down and read the initial email. So understand, when you're sending these, you're almost sending them with the expectation that they're not going to read it closely right away oftentimes, but that you're going to shock them with a little bit of a follow-up, which I'll link to a video where I go more in depth on that, where they're going to go down and read the email more closely. So I talked about how you can do it by industry too. So again, I won't read the whole email. Notice almost the exact same visible structure, 3 bodies, who, why, what, except now same titles, but I made it more specific to life science. So when you're filtering your lists, I did VP of FP&A and controller in life science. So look at some of the things I named from a planning perspective this time that are very similar, except more targeted for this industry. So clinical trial planning, that's unique to life science, budget forecasting, commercializations. We work with customers on, that should say on or to unify data from clinical trials and enhance portfolio planning through the use of AI and machine learning. Again, in the controller one now, I named grant accounting. That's something a little bit unique to life science, where oftentimes they're gifted government grants and they have to unlock certain milestones before they get access to more funding. So similar structure, similar priorities I named, but made them more targeted for these titles. And this is how you increase your response rates. When you're sending out thousands or tens of thousands of emails, slight differences, like a 1 or a 2% difference, can be the difference of 10, 20 responses in a given month or a given quarter, which could be 4 to 5 meetings and 2 to 3 ops. Like, that's the sort of math you got to be doing in your head. And it's why I make every single word count. I don't waste any space. Every sentence has to add value and increase the likelihood they respond and accept a meeting. So now I'll show you how I do this for cold calling, because it's very similar. Simple, easy, repeatable. That's the motto. And what, just mentally understand that the point you want to be able to get to, and this is where the job starts to feel easier, is you got to get to the point where you can easily pick up the phone only knowing their name, their company name, and job title that you can just plug in. You don't need to know anything about the company itself. You don't need to go on their investor relations page and look at their priorities. You don't need to do a bunch of a bunch of research on LinkedIn on their bio, because you don't need to go in that level of detail in order to book meetings. I've seen the numbers. I've seen people do it over and over again. It's that, again, daily friction. That's how you prevent yourself from easily being able to make $100 when you're having to pull up, kill your flow, look at their LinkedIn, look at their company. When I'm going to show you some script examples in a second, but the cold calling structure I use, I go in depth again on in other videos, but it's first to take control with what I call an assumptive formality. So my goal is to limit variance and get a formality from them so that I can immediately get into making a value statement. This is why I personally don't like a lot of the cheesy permission-based openers or pattern interrupts. Hey, I know you hate cold calls. Do you have 27 seconds for me to tell you why I'm calling? Like, none of that stuff. I don't like that for new SDRs. Just know you don't need to use that stuff. To this day, I just say, how are you? Or how have you been? I'll show you a little more detail in a second. And then once you get into what you're telling them or why you called, you make what I call a value statement, which is a little different than a cold call script. I generally target 30 seconds. So I don't ask them any questions. I don't ask if they're free to chat or if now is a good time. I take control of the formality and tell them who I am, why I'm reaching out, and what I want. Very, very similar to the email structure, except there's just some slight tweaks to make it more of a cold call format. You don't just read your emails. So here's an example. I did VP of FP&A in the insurance industry. So the opening, notice the downward inflection. I seek to get a formality. Hey, John, this is Connor Murray calling from XYZ company. How are you? And I'm just going to pause there. Notice the difference. Hey, John, this is Connor Murray calling from XYZ company. How are you today? That's a little like the prospect is going to register that differently. I get these cold calls and I don't know what it is about adding today or how are you doing? There's just little triggers that in the prospect's head, they're like, oh, this is a cold call. I don't have time for this. Do they actually want to know how my day is going? I'm really busy right now. That downward inflection subconsciously signals you're not here to waste time. Hey, John, this is Connor Murray calling from XYZ company. How are you? And I like to sound what I call professionally enthusiastic. Most of the responses I get are, good. How are you? They might sound confused and be like, good. Who is this? What is this regarding? And whatever they give me, I just immediately take control. And you can say, good, I'm just reaching out because, or good, the reason I'm calling is, so here, doing good. I'm just reaching out because I'm part of the insurance applications team here that works on priorities related to profitability and loss management, financial reporting, and scenario analysis. And we work with customers to integrate claims management systems to track KPIs like expense and loss ratios, and also automate much of the financial reporting process with audit trails and simplified regulatory reporting. So I'll be your main point of contact here for any priorities in these areas going forward, resources you may need, anything like that. And then I like to finish with a downward inflection and basically get their response to that and see if it resonated. So let me back up. Again, you can notice how I put in a lot of things that are specific to insurance. I basically told them concisely who I am. I tried to make myself sound a little more relevant by saying insurance applications, because they're not always logically registering everything they're saying. They're basically just like subconsciously, does this person sound like they could actually help me? Is this potentially worth spending more time with them and even pulling in my peers potentially to take on a project like this? And is enough of what they're saying relevant to me? So a lot of times these little words like insurance applications, claims management systems, track KPI, a lot of this will sound relevant to them. But if you go back and play that, it was about 30 seconds. And again, you don't have to have this memorized. Like, this is the first time I was reading that out. And a lot of the practice just comes from rehearsing it and getting comfortable with where your pauses and inflections are. But I told them who I am, why I'm reaching out. I basically said, here's who I am. Here are the priorities and challenges I solve, and how we solve them. And here's why I'm important to you, because if you have any of these priorities, I'll be your main point of contact. And then if they received it well, a lot of times they'll tell you and be like, oh, great, thanks for reaching out. What'd you say your name was? Where are you calling from? They might have some questions, but you can tell it was received well. And then you can kind of pivot after giving them whatever they ask and just say, and by the way, I know I kind of called you out of the blue here. So I'm more actually looking to set some time later this week just to get introduced and aligned with your priorities going forward. Are you free on Wednesday or Thursday? And kind of naturally pivot into that. But I like to get this pause because they'll give you information. They might give you an objection, but now you still have this bullet in the chamber that's more designed to sell the meeting. So like, even if they have an objection, it's like, you're going to be a main, but like, they have priorities and challenges. If your company has a good product, there's probably a way that you can help them in some capacity. And going forward, if any of these things come up related to expense and loss ratios. They're talking internally with their boss. Well, we can't track any of this stuff. They'll remember, oh, who's that person who reached out to me? But that's enough of a reason for them to take an introductory call so that they have you going forward. So same with the emails. These can be tweaked, similar structure. If I did this for life science or retail or a different title, they'd all look pretty similar like this. Have that who you are, why you're calling, what you want. The what you want is what gives you a shot on net and a chance of booking the meeting. So don't have too much back and forth before trying to pull it into the meeting. But you can plug and play different priorities and challenges depending on who you're calling. And over time, you can develop a lot of these so that if you have a list of 100 people that work in FP&A in the insurance industry, you really only need to change their name and that's it. Like then you can, this is going to be a relevant script for most of them, regardless of whether you know anything about their LinkedIn or their specific company. So now that you have good messaging in place, you have good emails, you have good call scripts, you have lists built, here is where you level up as an SDR. So a lot of SDRs get to the point, and this was me at like the 6-month mark, where I was hitting my numbers, but it was a grind. Like I was I was showing up early, working late, going in a conference room, ripping 100 plus dials every day and grinding my teeth to get to my number. And just know that to get to the next level, and this is doable, you have to put efficient daily processes in place. So a lot of this will naturally happen as you get more familiar with your internal systems, your CRM, but a lot of this is just a daily process you need to put in place and follow, which can look a little different for each person. But yeah, like I said, you have the effect of messaging. Now you need to scale it. You need to become hyper efficient with it. So each cold call, each email, what I say is each one has a certain probability that you will book a meeting. Every time you get a live call, there's a non-zero chance you're going to book a meeting. Every time you send an email, there's a non-zero chance you book a meeting. So the goal is to get more relevant messaging into the hands of relevant high-value personas as possible. The more probabilities you give yourself or the shots on net you give yourself, the higher likelihood you're going to get meetings and therefore opportunities. So what helps you do this is an efficient daily process, because when you have something in place, especially on email, meetings and responses come in on autopilot. So the way to create a consistent daily process is first just come up with one you will stick to and get data points. Don't try different things every day. I was alluding to this earlier. There's no one size fits all. Some people like to call in the morning. Some people like to email in the morning. I'll show you what my process is in a second. And this is something you'll always be optimizing. I'm 7 years in and I'm still optimizing my processes all the time. Things change too. You rarely ever just have the same territory or sell the same products or sell in the same market segments. Selling into enterprise, your processes are going to be a lot different than selling into SMB. I'll take that back. It's not a lot different, but there are tweaks you want to make. So, and the other thing to remember is that results will never come in a linear fashion. What I say is when it's hot, it's hot. When it's cold. Anyone who's worked in sales knows that. Like you'll go 2-3 weeks doing the exact same things as you were before and book no meetings. And then the last week of the month, you get like 9. It's crazy sometimes, but the key is to be able to continue following your process, even during periods of slowdowns, because you're gonna mentally get challenged a few times where you're like, am I just wasting my time right now? And if you've had success with your process in the past, chances are you're not. You just have to ride out those ebbs and flows. So here's a very basic example. To this day, this is my preferred structure. So the morning, I basically, the first hour and a half of the day, and this is especially what I did as an SDR, I'd sit down, put my headset in, pull up a list that I had created, pulled up the associated template, and just send emails. I'd do it for like an hour and a half first thing in the morning. Some people like to cold call in the morning. It is a good time to cold call people. I've also found it's a good time to email people because they haven't gotten their day started yet. Generally, they're not in meetings. They have a little more time to actually take in your email. So first hour and a half was email. When I got really good manually, I could send pretty easily 100 to 150 in that hour and a half period. The next hour, I got myself prepared for my late morning cold calls. So I would revamp, like make sure I was ready for the lists I was targeting, get those scripts ready, maybe rehearse it a couple times, mentally prepare to call VPs of FP&A and insurance, for example. And then around 10:30 to 12, that's when I would just go in my conference room and just start ripping dials. And honestly, if I was doing well, I would just do it through lunch. I don't know about you, but if I'm doing well cold calling, I just want to keep the momentum going. So then take lunch. When you're back, that is when I spent some time maybe being more tailored and making more strategic outreach to accounts I had discussed with my account executive, where I knew if I set a meeting in those accounts, it would be more likely. That'll be a different video on how, when you're going after really targeted personas at really targeted accounts, how you can level up this messaging a bit. But that would spend my time doing that. And then the next hour and a half, prepare my email list to target for the next morning, so that when I sit down the next morning, I know exactly what I'm doing and get those templates ready. And then at the end of the day, cold calls. And this was not every day went like this, obviously. The key routine was morning emails, morning calls, strategic messaging, next day prep, cold calls. Some days the strategic messaging got eliminated because maybe I had meetings that I had set, or there's some internal meetings that you have to take. You're never always going to have be able to do this every day, 5 days a week. The key is to do as much of it as possible and be as consistent as possible. And to take it a layer deeper, this is an AB cadence that I use specifically for email, but you can also mix in calls. So again, we have our contact list built in advance by department, industry, market segment, slightly modified versions for depending on who we're targeting. In the AB cadence, this is what gamifies the job and gets those responses to trickle in almost on autopilot. So if you're work at a company where you can automate sequences, you don't have to spend an hour and a half doing this in the morning. You can just automate them and maybe spend this time cold calling. But as an example, I still do things manually. I work at a company where they don't want us auto blasting. We're a really big company. They don't want reps doing that. So Monday morning, first hour and a half, I picked my first list, FP&A insurance, fired it all off. Tuesday morning, woke up, picked a different list, maybe controllers and retail or something, fired it off. Wednesday morning, the first thing I did was go into my sent box, scroll down to the first message I sent on Monday, the first email I sent, take my first follow-up and send it to all of them. So you can see how it's a B. Basically, you're following up every other day within 48 hours, sometimes once. You can play around with the timing. I don't recommend waiting more than 48 hours though. I think for the first follow-up within 24 hours is actually good. And then after that, 48 hours. And the follow-up should basically be short, concise messages telling them to please give you their thoughts on your email so that they go down and read it. But this was a structure every day, no matter how I was feeling. I don't care what I did that weekend. My head was foggy. Sit down. I physically had lists ready to go. I physically had templates that were already made, and I could just get going. And if you want to take it a layer further on the off days, so like Monday, you email group A and you're not following up with them till Wednesday. Tuesday afternoon in that call block, you could call Monday. So every other day, it's like email, call, email, call, email, call. So now, once you're getting these responses, you're going to see meetings are going to start to trickle in. It just takes time to go through the motions. So you're not going to be sending hundreds of emails out of the gate and making hundreds of calls. Just go through the motions of what I just laid out. Start with a list of 10 people, start with a list of 25 people, something that you can physically go through the motions, get used to those internal systems and ramp up your numbers as you get more comfortable. But you're going to start getting responses. Those responses are naturally, statistically going to lead to meetings. Now that you have meetings, one of the final ways to optimize the SDR role here is to maximize your conversion rates. So when it comes to conversion rates, there's two key variables. What percent show up to the meetings that you book? It's not always a guarantee they show up. And when they do show up, what percentage of them convert to opportunities? Here's some little things you can do to increase show rate as a start. Ask them to accept the meeting on the phone. You don't always have to do this, but a little trick, you can say, great, you booked the meeting, confirm the email and say, hey, I just sent that through. Do you mind taking a look? I've been having a little trouble with my email today and I just want to make sure that went through. And a lot of times you can get them to accept on there. Schedule the meeting within the same week if possible. I've found lower show rates if a weekend separates the meeting. Third, this is probably most important, send a strong agenda. This is something you can prepare with your account executive, like a standard template that you can copy and paste. What I see too much out there is a fluffy agenda that's like introductions, how we can be an educational resource, learn more about your role at X company. And everyone's like, okay, this sounds like every single meeting invite I'm sent. I don't want to teach you about my role. So be introductions is fine, but make it more specific, like discuss how we work with XYZ title in the insurance industry or something where they're like, okay, I'm going to learn something on this call. Another question I get a lot, what to do when the prospect does not accept an invite. So differing opinions on this, a lot of this, talk it out with your account executive. I've found that reaching out in advance can actually harm show rates. So if you start hounding them with calls and emails, it actually ends up inadvertently, when you do it enough, you actually give people easy outs who are maybe 50-50 on taking the meeting and were going to show up. And then you reach out and call them and say, hey, I just want to make sure we're still on. And they're like, you know what, actually, this isn't a priority. So I don't think the risk is worth the reward. Talk to your rep. If it's a good title, they'll probably want to show up anyway. And what I do is within 3 to 5 minutes, if they still haven't joined, I forward them the meeting reminder and say, hey, I'm on with my team and just open the Zoom. Are you still able to join? And you'll get a lot of people who jump on who maybe weren't going to join, but when you send that, they do join, or they end up responding to that later, apologize, and you get the meeting rescheduled. They still don't respond, then you can give them a call. Otherwise, the meeting's probably shot. So just some advice there. And then when it comes to giving yourself the best chance of converting these meetings to opportunities, start to pay attention. This is data you can get over time. What products are converting the most into opportunities? What are your highest value products or services? Which personas tend to convert the most to opportunities? Which combinations of the two? Another thing, this is more honestly on your account executive, but if you want to help them out, come in with a strong value hypothesis as to how you can actually help them. So you're not just asking, tell me about your role, but come in with a hypothesis of why you set up the call, how you tend to work with people like them in this industry. And at the very least, just go in with the mindset that I'm going to teach them. They're going to learn something. I'm going to be a value add to them. A lot of people respond positively when you do that. They just don't know what to expect on the call. And then a lot of this too has to do, and this could be 30 minutes in itself, has to do with that relationship you build with your account executives, like I was talking earlier. That's honestly, even though it's not ideal, probably the biggest factor to whether meetings convert to ops at a higher rate, the better the working relationship you have with your account executive. So when it comes to optimizing these processes over time, the ways to do this are A/B test your emails. Don't change too much at once. Make slight tweaks and see if one version is better than another, and then stick with that version if it is. Follow-up sequences. You can test different follow-ups. Subject lines. I don't recommend getting too cute with the subject lines. I prefer to just keep it simple, either their company, your company, introduction, or their name, your name, introduction. You can also keep track of which objection handling responses, especially over email, work best. I didn't get into that in this video. I have others where I do, but that's another thing. Another thing you can do, take time zones into account. So again, with that schedule, people tend to respond most early in the morning. So if you work on the East Coast, you can email East Coast people and set the stuff up to go out at different time zones of the day. And you can plan to cold call that late morning cold call session, cold call your West Coast or your Mountain Time accounts where it is early in the morning for them. Again, you don't need to do that in the beginning, but over time, these are slight ways you can optimize your daily process. You can take it a layer deeper too with the email templates and cold call script. Beyond just persona and industry, you can look for specific intent signals. So if you get signals like, hey, this person attended this webinar, attended this event, whatever the intent signal is, you can come up with specific emails for that intent signals. Work with the account executives too, next one, that are easiest to work with and reward you for your work. What I've found is the 80-20 rule applies here. If you have multiple account executives, spend 80% of your time doing work for the one that's easiest and best to work with. There's generally not a rule that you have to spend equal time with everyone, but you don't want to ignore account executives either for internal brand purposes usually. But you want to spend the most time with the ones that are the best to work with. Track which personas and industries are performing well for messaging with which products, and double down on what's working, squeeze the juice out of what's working. And the last thing you can do is reverse engineer your metrics. So start figuring out, what is my quota for the month, or for the quota, $1 million in pipeline. Okay, what's the average size of an opportunity? How many opportunities do I need to get? Okay, how many meetings do I need to set in order to get that amount of opportunities? Again, the meeting conversion rate. That's why that's important to pay attention to. But if you're a new SDR, I think this boils it down as to this. These are the quickest hitting things that you can focus on to immediately start getting ramped into role. I tried to make this video so that you're not spread too thin and taking advice from too many different people. I know it's overwhelming. So hope this helped. If it did, and you want more hands-on guidance actually implementing this and creating messaging for your own company and the personas you target and actually implementing this process, you can book a coaching call with me. The link is in the description below, or you can check out the pinned comment to the SDR Accelerator. I'm the lead instructor in there, so I'll be on weekly live calls that we can discuss this on, and hope to see you in there. So comment below if you have any thoughts. Hope this helped. If it did, hit the like button. I'll see y'all on the next one.